Hello, I am excited and proud to introduce the Eye of the Serpent playlist dedicated to the POPOL VUH. The POPOL VUH is the creation myth of the Quiché Maya of southern Guatemala, and it is arguably one of the most iconic and studied works of Native American literature in all history. It is a valuable resource for understanding the Maya cultures of the ancient, colonial, and contemporary worlds. And what I'll be doing in this playlist is looking at some important themes and subjects that relate this mythical tale to other traditions from North, Central, and South Native traditions, as well as kind of a play-by-play look at some of the important episodes that run through the course of the mythical narrative. I'm also looking forward to bringing in some of my own experiences, anecdotes, and photography from my travels across the Central America and Mexico in order to kind of give a visual component to it. So I invite you to join me as I take this playlist and explore some of the important ideas that make the Popol Vuh such a fascinating and exciting text to understand and to share with you all. The southern highlands of Guatemala ripple with green mountains. Occasional volcanic activity among the mountains replenishes the soil with warmth and nutrients. Cooler climate in the higher elevations improves the growth of corn. These conditions allowed the local Maya to foster massive, dense communities. Here the Quiché Maya built an empire, one of the largest in the Americas by the 16th century. And they wrote the history of their origins and kings in the Popol Vuh. Popol Vuh is often translated as council book. More literally, Popol comes from Quiché for mat, referring to the woven mats set upon the benches of the council house. This building from Copan shows the woven mat pattern in the facade's top level. As a symbol for the ruling Maya council, the Book of the Mat foreshadows the political organization described in the myth itself. We will see even the gods convening in council to decide how to create the world. The myth's history as we have it today ends between 1554 and 1558, a generation after Spanish conquest. While the scribes preserved the account in the Quiché Mayan language, they wrote it with the Spanish alphabet. Beginning with the creation of the world, the Popol Vuh tells of the beginnings of life, humans, and kingdoms. But most famously, the myth recounts the fantastic adventures of the hero twins as they combat titans and other villains to make the world safe for humanity. The final episodes tell of Quiché kings and conquests, from the first ancestors to the last rulers by the first decades of the Spanish colony. The myth begins on a note that its original text is hidden. This story may have remained unknown to the world were it not for the efforts of Friar Francisco Jimenez, who discovered the only surviving copy and translated it from Quiché Mayan to Spanish by the beginning of the 18th century. The next part of this playlist will look at poetics and performance in the Popol Vuh. Why was it written and how was it used? Join us for a look at the book's literary qualities in the next episode. To speak of the Popol Vuh as literature, we must consider its pertinent genres, especially myth, legend, and history. Myths are culturally shared stories that explain the origins of natural or social conditions. In the Popol Vuh, they explain, for example, how an animal has taken a certain shape, why people are mortal, or why a certain lineage should rule a land. Legends in the Popol Vuh tell of events widely accepted as true, even if they couldn't be verified. And the Popol Vuh is also a history because it recounts past events from the region in a sequential manner. The Popol Vuh therefore blends the three genres, which often happens in Native American literature. Myth leading into legend, leading into history. Events from the cosmic are just as consequential as those in the mundane. The edition transcribed by Francisco Jimenez presents the text in a long column at left, in parallel with the opposite Spanish. Just listening to the text reveals that it is elegant poetry, a tale meant to be heard rather than simply read. One of the most widely praised qualities in the Popol Vuh is the symmetric rhythm in many parts of the Quiché Mayan text. Poetry in the modern times likes to work with cadenced rhymes. The poetry of the Popol Vuh, however, follows other forms, especially in couplets paired by syllabic counts or grammatic patterns. The following sample comes from the moment when the sacred grandparents create a race of humans out of wood, an episode we will return to later in this playlist. The translation is by Alan J. Christenson, and I link to the source in the description box. Kishu chashik rumal ka tsak ka pit, timala ti ishim ti tsite, sha ti banatahik, sha pu chel apanok, tikachach, tikakotach puch, uchi, uwachche, she uchashik achkich, kate puch kachik kihiloshik, rish malik ti ishim, ti tsite, kich, pit, shecha ri hun atit, hun mama tikech, are ri mama, are ach tsite, Spiakok pi. Are ri atit. Ach kich. Ach pit tirakan. Shmukane pi. You may have noticed a few examples of the rhythmic, poetic groupings in the text. Alan Christenson lists 16 types of parallel forms. Although we do not have an earlier version of the text to confirm, it is very likely that the POPOL VUH was written in Mayan glyphs. The ancient glyphs were often composed as horizontal pairs read downward. This would have been ideal for poetic couplings such as those from the narration. Some glyphic texts actually use this style. This is Stele 4 from Ixtut's Guatemala. Its intricate glyphs not only recount a king's royal calendar ceremony, but also evoke it through poetic coupling. For a translation by Mark Zenter, I linked to his article in the description box. Like most Mayan texts written in glyphs, the latter episodes of the POPOL VUH celebrate the feats and conquests of the Quiche kings. The text's eloquent phrasing suggests that the myth was probably recited for political ceremonies. Maya orators perhaps recited a selection of pertinent chapters for the given occasion, to remind the audience that the king should rule because of his mighty forefathers. Myths were not simply tales for entertainment, but they could have real social weight. Join us for the next video, which will explore why the POPOL VUH is so important for Mayan studies. It remains an ornate gateway to the past worlds of the ancient Maya. If ancient glyphs sketch an outline of Maya culture in black and white, the POPOL VUH fills it with color. POPOL VUH, the book for the council mat, is possibly the most important source for understanding Maya religion and civilization, from ancient to modern times. Its text has a rich diversity of such subjects. This episode will glance at a few of the epic tales' most important contributions to our study. From west to east and from north to south, art across the ancient Maya land points to ideas or episodes found in the tale. While this in itself doesn't mean that every region had the same telling of the story, the uncanny frequency with which certain themes appear over great distances suggests that the area shared a common lore. The POPOL VUH references many such general ideas among the Maya. One example comes from the episode with 7 Macaw, whom we will return to in a later episode. This part featured a brilliant parrot whose power rivaled that of the creators. And so we find Macaw images at sites of political power, such as palaces and temples from Yucatan in the north, Copan in the east, and Tikal in the Petén heartland. Indeed, in this very example, one of the hero twins is directly confronting the villainous 7 Macaw, a scene vividly described in the POPOL VUH itself. Another Maya concept was the monkey as a symbol for art and writing. Here a monkey is adorned in noble ornaments to highlight the elite status and prestige that royal scribes could enjoy. In the story, the hero twins' half-brothers are artists and scribes, and they have monkey names. A detail worth noting is that though the POPOL VUH does seem to reference a significant number of episodes found across the Maya area, it does not mention all of them from the entire mythical cycle. Many texts and paintings from the classic period, 200 to 900 AD, allude to moments involving the corn god, who had a prevalent role in the myth despite his absence in the POPOL VUH. The myth also hints at astronomy. Returning to the hero twins' half-brothers, their tree-climbing escapades as monkeys could explain the retrograde path of Mars, which is itself synced with the monkey sign in the Maya calendar, according to Dennis Tedlock. Including the monkey twins, several major characters in the POPOL VUH are named after the sacred calendar, using 260 days counting every combination of 13 numerals and 20 signs. These include Underworld figures and the dominant hero twin, Hunahpu, or one blowgunner. The myth details ritual activities such as the ball game and the bean casting oracle. Today, the Quiche Maya continue to cast tzite beans as divination in parts of Guatemala's southern highlands. And lastly, for today's episode, nuances of social organization bookend the myth. Its latter chapters tell of dynasties and conquests, as well as symbols of political authority transmitted down generations. The next episode will begin the tale itself. Join us for the Maya creation of the world. Wa'e, ka katzininok, ka kachamamok, katzinonik, ka kasilanik, ka kalolinik, katolona, puch u bakach. A stillness, a murmur. Below, just rippling waters to the world's edges. Above, just a dark pall, a constant night. This wasn't enough. The creators therefore assembled in council. They came together in pairs. They will be the first to speak, and they will join the first words to start the dawn of creation. The first word is earth, and from this word arose the earth, rising and clumping together into masses from a settling froth. Like weaving upon a loom, the creators divided this new world into its portions. They raised the firmament with an X-frame and bent its corners down to the edges of the sea. The one continent would float in this cosmic pool like a great alligator. Mountains, lakes, and forests rose from the surface of its firm back. The creators wanted praise for their great work, so they would make a race to give them glory and worship. And so they began with animals. Now may they speak our names in prayer. Thus came the chatter of creatures that chirped and squawked, yet refused to speak the sacred names of their makers. This generation was flawed and incompetent, so the creators left the animals to wander the earth and devour one another. They must make a new race to receive their due worship. The creators formed a man out of mud and entreated it to move, to speak, to pray. Yet it could do none of these things. It was a mindless, sluggish lump, bereft of all articulation. It was also flawed and doomed to destruction. The creators brought a rain that melted it back into the earth from which it was made. Before their third trial, the creators used oracles of maize grains and tzite beans to divine a more correct means to mankind. They then carved and crafted a race from wood. Lighter, more mobile, and more eloquent than the previous efforts, the wood people proliferated, a social and technological humanity. But they, too, were flawed, for they would not remember those who had made them. Neither blood nor spirit flowed in their dried bodies, and so they also perished for their failure. Now this was the most spectacular of the devastation. Monstrous knives and jaguars descended upon the wood people, and when they retreated to their houses, even their own tools and dogs dashed upon them, scolded them for being abused and beaten daily. Powerful winds swept away the last of this wooden race. Only those who clung to the trees survived the cataclysm, and they became the monkeys whose descendants remained there among the branches. And here the question of a modern race will hang for the time being. Until then, the POPOL VUH takes a major turn to a series of grand episodes about making the world safe to inhabit. Join us for the next episode to meet prideful titans menacing the world and the clever twins who must defeat them. Are kut sha hupik sak natanoch uwach uleu. Macha pi kech. Hun kut kunimarisach rib. Wukub kakish upi. The world remains engulfed in the constant night since its creation. A sun could shine and a moon could glow, yet a sinister force prevents them from illuminating the world. This one is Wukub Kakish, Seven Macaw. Bedecked in precious jewels and metals, Seven Macaw regards himself the light of the world, and this vain delusion keeps the sky dark. Only a champion could confront such a titan, and here the POPOL VUH introduces two, the hero twins, who will be the protagonists for this episode and the next couple. The twins' main weapon is the blowgun, and this is what they use to knock the glory out of Seven Macaw. While the parrot is nibbling on fruit upon a high branch, the twins shoot a pellet into his teeth. Wounded and enraged, Seven Macaw rips out the arm of the foremost twin, Hunachpu, before retreating home. In this spectacular sculpture, the arm remains in a jaguar mouth, extending from the bird's belly. Disguised as healers, the twins reach Seven Macaw's house and offer to remove the pain in his teeth, which are carved turquoise gemstones. In fact, they actually remove the pain by removing the teeth altogether. They also detach the silver plaque surrounding his eyes, as well as all the jewelry fueling his sense of grandeur. All that remained was a naked Macaw, stripped of his past glory, reduced to a shadow of his former power. Even after the hero twins defeated Seven Macaw, they still had his family to contend with. Seven Macaw had two sons, Sipak Na, who raises mountains, and Gab Rakan, who raises them. Together they bring chaos to the earth by continually changing its surface. The story tells first of Sipak Na, whose name comes from the Gar by way of the Gulf of Mexico. Even other teams had had enough of the constant devastation. One group, the 400, tried to crush Sipak Na in a pit. But when they failed to kill him, he retaliated by finding them all in their house and crashing its roof down upon them. Upon dying, the 400 rose to the firmament and became the stars of the night sky. So the hero twins took to ending the terrain of terror. Again in disguise, they invited Sipak Na to crawl into a cave to pick out a plump, delicious crab. It was actually just a decoy they had made from a flat rock for the body and bromeliad leaves for the claws. When Sipak Na got stuck in the cave opening, it collapsed upon him. The cave entrapped him on his own back, halfway into the space. He gave one last breath, and his giant's body petrified, a new mountain joining the cavern's range. The hero twins would use the Titan's appetites against them both. Just as they had tricked Sipak Na with a fake crab, they then plotted to defeat his brother, Gab Rakan, the Earth Shaker. The hero twins smothered a raw bird in gypsum and then roasted it on a spit. When they offered it to Gab Rakan, he devoured it ravenously. The minerals that had encrusted the bird grew within Gab Rakan, fossilizing him until he could no longer move. The twins tied him and rolled him down a ravine, a menace to nature no more. As this episode closes, it invites comparison to other Native American tales of giants vanquished and petrified, melded permanently into the landscape. From the Native American view, everything in nature has its story. The photo here is of Mount Kawi in northern Guatemala, where the locals liken its shape to a stone crocodile. Stars now appear in the sky, but the sun and moon have not yet come to give their light. Nor has a new humanity been made since the age of the wood people. It is not yet that time. Now that the story has introduced the hero twins, it will backtrack to detail their origin. Join us for the following episode to discover their infancy tales and next adventures. Wa'e kute utsi hoshik. Are ki pi ri hun hunachpu ke uchashik. Are kut ki kachau rishpiakok shumukane. In the last episode, the POPOL VUH, the Book of the Council Mat, introduced the hero twins as the protagonists for the myth's biggest adventures, beginning with the defeat of Seven Macaw and his sons. Abruptly after these first exploits, the story backtracks to tell of the twins' birth, childhood, and destiny, where they came from and what they would become. This episode also brings in the twins' entire family tree, so I sketch it here, starting with the grandparents Shpiakok and Shmukane, two of the world's creators. Notice that each of the sets can be reckoned as a pair, personifications of the Mesoamerican cosmic duality. This episode begins with the original household, the grandparents, the father twins, and their first sons, the monkey twins. The fathers were master ball players, and the monkeys were master artists and scribes. The two pairs regularly played the ball game, to great diversion for the world above, yet clamor for the world below. The ball's constant motion rattled through the dark caverns of the underworld, Xibalbá, the place of fright. Its rulers, the Achawab, or lords, conspired to eliminate their common nuisance. Here the POPOL VUH introduced the council of underworld lords, again by pairs, and what afflictions each of them gave the living. The lords sent 4 owls to invite the father twins to their realm, to play the ball game against them in the lands of the dead. They accepted the challenge. As the fathers departed, they settled their affairs at home. They promised their family that they would return, and they would also stash their own ball in the house's ceiling beams. In Mesoamerican myth, caves were thresholds between the worlds of the living and the dead, and certain beings could cross the two through these channels. Here the POPOL VUH describes the father twins' entry into Xibalbá, with rich details of the underworld's geography, an exemplar of how Mesoamericans regarded the lands of the afterlife. The next video will speak more on the chambers and trials of Xibalbá. It is just enough for now to say that the father twins continually failed the trials. And at last, once they lost the ball game against Xibalbá, the lords sentenced the two to be sacrificed. The lords left the head of Hunhunachpu to hang in a calabash tree, as if just another innocuous fruit. Drawn to the tree's bounty, a Xibalbá lord's daughter named Blood Lady sought the fruit. Then the head spoke to her, told her to hold out her open palm to receive his seed. He spat into the palm, which inseminated her with the hero twins. Fearing that Xibalbá would kill her if they found her pregnant, Blood Lady escaped to the living world to find the children's home. Indeed, the hero twins already began their magical feats while still in her womb, by which they tricked the underworld's lords to seeing their mother's bloody heart in a clot of tree sap. When Blood Lady arrived at the house, grandmother Shumukane refused her because her sons were dead. She doubted that the newcomer was carrying her grandchildren, so she tested her by demanding a net of maize from a barren field. When the twins again used their magic within their mother, the full net proved that they were already showing their powers. Blood Lady gave birth to the hero twins, Hunachpu, the blowgunner, and Xbalamque, the little jaguar deer. Their grandmother hated the infants crying, so she told the monkey twins to leave their half-brothers to the wilderness. Even while the infant twins were exposed to the mountains, ants, and brambles, they knew to make deals with their tormentors. Leave us be, and you may take other things for the rest of time. They would make similar exchanges during their underworld trials in the next episode. As the twins grew into boyhood, they became adept hunters with their blowguns. Having returned to the household, they were expected to shoot birds to feed the family. The monkey twins were too engaged with their arts and writing to help with all the chores. The hero twins plotted to deceive and defeat their elder half-brothers. They then told them that the birds were no longer within reach, so they asked the monkey twins to help bring the shot ones from the trees. The elder twins climbed too high, and they were afraid to climb back down. So the younger twins told them to loosen their loincloths and swing down from the branches with them. All the scurrying and acrobatics among the branches turned the twins into howler monkeys, their cloths into tails. Once they finally reached the ground and arrived at the house, the grandmother laughed them off. The howler monkeys returned to the trees, where they still play today. In the final scene for this episode, the hero twins tried to grow a garden, but because this is mythical time, extraordinary things happen to it. They empower an axe to slash its overgrowth and reap the field, but every night the trees and weeds return. They wait overnight to find the culprit, and then they catch a rat. The rat promises to reveal a secret if they release him. Their fathers were ball players, and the ball was still stashed in the house, so the twins themselves were destined to play the game instead of tending crops. The rat led the twins to the hidden ball, on which we close this episode. In the next video, the hero twins begin to play the ball game, leading themselves to face the challenges of the underworld as their fathers had. Join us for the following episode as the twins take on the might of Xibalbá itself. Kekikot tikut, shepek e chachel pahom. Nachtku she chachik ki tukel. Skimes rihom ki kachau. Tashkita ku ulok rahawal Xibalbá. This episode of the POPOL VUH picks up from the hero twins discovering that their fathers were ball players, and so were they. The twins had already gone to play at the ball court when this episode begins, and once again it drew the wrath of the underworld Xibalbá. As the lords had done with the father twins, they once again sent their messengers to the upper world to invite the hero twins to play. The Xibalbá messengers went to the house, but only grandmother Shumukane was there. The messenger owls entreated her to forward the boys their infernal invitation. Grandmother Shumukane thus sent a louse to carry the message to the ball court. It came upon a toad that gobbled it up, then hopped faster to the twins. A serpent ate the toad, and it was grasped by a swooping falcon, hurrying the message along. The boys captured the falcon, releasing the serpent, releasing the toad, releasing the louse, and finally releasing the invitation itself. Once the hero twins returned to the house, they took their ball gear and blowguns for their journey into the underworld. Parting with their grandmother, they planted an ear of corn in their house, for her to know that it would remain ripe for as long as they were alive. The hero twins took their descent into Xibalbá, first by steps into the dark depths below. They would face the same trials as the father twins before them, but through clever magic they would win the challenges where their fathers had failed. Xibalbá, the underworld, had deep caves with many dangers, so the boys were cautious of its constant threats. They crossed the rivers of death by riding their blowguns over the water. Where the Achawab, the lords, had humiliated the father twins by setting up mannequins as the first nobles to greet, the hero twins were not so readily deceived. We saw with Seven Macaw's family and the monkey twins that the brothers were much better at sending tricks than getting them. The twin brother Hunachpu plucked a leg hair and turned it into a mosquito, which he then sent to bite each of the lords. The first of these were the pair of silent, inanimate mannequins. As the insect went out to bite each lord, the shriek caused the others to call him by name. What's the problem, One Death? What's the problem, Seven Death? And so on until all the lords were identified. Thus the hero twins recognized that the first pair of lords were just fakes, and they greeted the other pairs by their true names. The twins also refused to sit on a hot bench which had humiliated their fathers. The boys and the lords of Xibalbá would play ball each day of the engagement, and every night the lords imprisoned their visitors in a different cavernous chamber, each with challenges the hero twins must survive. The challenges are too many to list here, so we focus on a noteworthy 4. The underworld lords put the twins in the House of Darkness, their challenge to keep their 2 cigars lit all night. They summoned a couple fireflies to sit at the tips, where their soft glow in the pitch space tricked the watchmen to thinking that cigars were constantly burning. We will see this moment referenced in the next episode. After letting the Xibalbá lords win the next match, the twins agreed to give them a basket of colorful petals for their prize. Locked away in the House of Knives, however, the twins had no reach to any flower. So they sent leaf-cutter ants to the underworld's garden to pluck the petals and gather them in the basket. Meanwhile, the boys told the flying knives in the cavern that they could cut animals hereafter if they would spare the heroes themselves. The knives lowered their points and left the twins be, and thus they won that night's challenges. Likewise, in the House of Jaguars, the twins scattered bones for the animals to gnaw on, tricking the night watchmen to believing the jaguars had seized upon the boys at last. Their appearance by morning was yet another humiliating defeat for Xibalbá. The 4th cavern in this list is the House of Bats, where the twins' fate takes an unexpected turn. They managed to fit themselves into their blowguns to sleep sheltered from the swarm of Kamasots, the snatching bats, named for their terrible slashing claws. To see if dawn had yet appeared, Hunachpu stuck his head out from the blowgun hole. A bat lunged down and ripped his head off, then carried it away to give to the lords. The brother Xibalbá ordered the small field animals to find a replacement head for Hunachpu, to give the illusion that the twins were still intact and able to play ball. A Coati found a perfectly shaped squash with seeds for eyes to fit on his neck as a temporary substitute until they could get his actual head back. Meanwhile, Xibalbá played most of the game. Hunahpu, having a dumming head, was just posturing. The underworld lords had mounted his real head upon a ball court post. A rabbit waited out in a tomato patch for the ball to fly out of bounds. Once it did, all the lords of Xibalbá raced to fetch it in that direction. The rabbit took the round squash that Hunahpu had been wearing for his head and quartered it off to the tomato patch for the lords to find their ball. While they were all away, the hero twins took back the head from the post and reinstalled it upon Hunahpu. Thinking they had recovered their ball, the Xibalbá players put the squash into the court. It was an easy matter for Xibalbá to give it one final blow, sending it smashing into flesh and seed as it struck the court's wall. The twins won the last match and beat Xibalbá at their own game. The trials of Xibalbá were not yet over. Closing this episode is the Ahawab Lord's final challenge for the hero twins to see them jump 4 times across a fiery pit. The twins had another plan, however, which would require them to die at last. In one last act of defiance against their captors, the twins held each other's hands, looked into each other's eyes, and dove headfirst into the flaming chasm. The next episode will see the return of the hero twins. It will be a special installment for the POPOL VUH playlist because it will describe the entire scene around the single Maya vase. Join us for the following adventures. Kekikot tikut ronohel Xibalbá, takalki yuyub, takalki shulkab, mi shakachako, keitzich mawi ataten skiyat kib shecha. All of Xibalbá rejoiced over the death of the hero twins, who had beaten and humiliated the lords so many times on their own grounds. They would not realize that this too, while a real death, was another trick by the boys. It would be their final prank before defeating the underworld once and completely. This is a special installment for the Eye of the Serpent's POPOL VUH playlist because it will tell the entire episode through one work of art. This ancient vase dates between the 7th and 8th centuries in the late classic period of Maya history. Through a photography effect made by exposing the image during a full rotation of the vase, the full story appears in a single action-packed span. Thanks to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, this photo is in the public domain, and I link to the source in the description. Before jumping into the fiery pit, the boys had summoned a couple elder seers to convince the underworld lords to discard their cracked, charred bones into one of the cavernous rivers. This action would in fact bring the resurrection, as the bones scattered in the water reassembled the twins into a couple living catfish. As the hero twins emerged from the water, they returned to human form. The detail at upper right shows that a catfish barbel remained on Hunahpu's cheek after the transformation. Disguised in rags, the twins approached Xibalbá as a pair of lowly orphan boys, wandering entertainers. They promised a modest performance, but their dances were so captivating that they drew all the rulers in the lands of the dead. The twin spectacle then turned to their specialty throughout the myth, magic tricks. They astounded the underworld lords by burning houses down and then raising them back up. Here at right is one of the Death Lords marveling the show. With a ritual axe, Hunahpu performed the most amazing act, sacrificing the living and restoring them to life. The dog at lower right may be the one mentioned in this episode. A Xibalbá lord, perhaps even the one in this scene, gave his dog to watch the twins sacrifice it, then return it to life to an astounded audience. Then the lords challenged the twins to sacrifice each other. Brother Xibalbá lies on a ritual altar shaped like the upturned face of a mountain spirit, its brow supporting the back of the twins' reclining head. Xibalbá, the little jaguar deer, can be identified by his jaguar paws, ears, and tail. His brother, Hunahpu, is posed to strike the deathly blow toward the sacrifice and resurrection. Behind him is a firefly carrying a torch, recalling the last episode's scene of the twins surviving the House of Darkness. The twins' magic show enthralled the lords of Xibalbá with such force that it carried them away with their wishes for more action. All that was left was for themselves to participate. Now sacrifice us! And they did. In the next episode, the hero twins complete their vengeance upon Xibalbá. They restore their father's integrity in both name and body. Join us for the conclusion of the Xibalbá cycle and the coming of the dawn. Are ku na beshpus, rike u holom achaw. Hun kame u pi, rachawal Xibalbá. When the lords of Xibalbá asked the hero twins to sacrifice them for the magic show, they did the deed. One by one the twins seized upon the lords, but they revived none. All the servants of Xibalbá were gathered into a ravine, and the lords were vanquished. Then the boys ended their charade and revealed that they were in fact the twins, the sons of the father twins who were murdered in the Underworld. The surviving denizens of Xibalbá pleaded with the boys to spare them if they would show where their fathers were buried, near the ball court from the previous episodes. The hero twins decreed that the lords of Xibalbá would never return to power. They could no longer kill at will, nor would they receive lavish sacrifices. All they would receive would be worn-out utensils and tree sap for offerings, and all they may take would be the wicked people of the world. Moments of rebirth ripple over the end of the hero twin story in the POPOL VUH. You may remember from a previous episode that the twins had planted an ear of corn for their grandmother to watch over their state. The ear was alive and healthy until the boys threw themselves into the fire pit, and then it withered. The present episode told how it sprouted back to life after they emerged from the very river in which the lords had tossed their bones. Just as the twins were remade from their burnt bones, they went to the ball court of Xibalbá to restore their father from his. We'll begin our look at this famous Maya plate with the skull at center of this detail. This recalls how the lords of Xibalbá had sacrificed the father twins at the ball court after beating them at the game. Then the hero twins found their father's bones, represented by the skull. In Mesoamerican religion, the skull is both bone to be buried and seed to be sown, the harbinger of new life rising from dead remains. In this case, the twins' father, one Hunachpu, sprouts with the cornstalk from the top of his old shell. This cycle of death and rebirth, imagined through sprouting, is the principle of decorating skulls with flowers in the Days of the Dead, Mexico's oldest indigenous holiday. Here the twins' resurrected father rises from a fissure in the earth, likened to the shell of a turtle swimming in the cosmic ocean. This may remind you of Native American metaphors of the continent as Turtle Island, a very old symbol indeed. Flanking the scene are the hero twins themselves, Hunachpu at left and Xibalamque at right. As in our last video, spots on the cheek and arm identify the little jaguar deer on the right. They arrived to revive their father and give him ritual offerings. The boys then redeemed his name and body by proclaiming him not only avenged from death, but also first in worship. As the twins complete their work in the worlds of here and below, they ready for the worlds above. One rose to become the sun, the other the moon. Because they had conquered 7 Macaw, true light could then fill the sky at last. The 400, killed by 7 Macaw's son Sipak Na in that episode, also ascended into the sky. 7 Macaw and his sons were defeated. The very underworld, Xibalbá, was defeated. Earth was now safe to start the days and begin humanity, which will begin the next episode. Join us to witness the creation of the new age. Wae kut utikarik ta shna ochish winak. Ta shtukush puch richok u tiochil winak. At last the world was ready for the time of sowing and dawning, a metaphor for creation used throughout the POPOL VUH text. This metaphor recalls the planting of crops and awaiting the sunlight to raise them. Now the sun was coming to glow, and the earth was safe to populate with humanity. As from the beginning of the tale, for one last time the creator gods assembled in council, to bring together their thoughts on a final generation. From a previous episode, you may remember the attempts to make a race that would worship their makers. Each had a flaw that had ensured its demise: the animal's incoherent speech, the mud's inarticulate build, and the wood's inconsiderate actions. Animals entered the mountain named Pashil and Gayala to gather the maize that the gods would grind into dough. White and yellow maize would become the fat and flesh of the new generation. This substance would also be the staple of human diet. But once again, even this version of humanity came out with a flaw. Their vision was perfect and ultimate. They could see through trees and hills to the ends of the earth. The first people had no need to move because everywhere their sight was absolute, boundless, and identical. They could gain no differences in perspective. So how then could omniscience be a flaw? The creations were too much like their creators. The gods could not accept this likeness, so they decided to fog human sight, like breathing vapor upon a mirror. This barrier then prepared the first people to multiply over the world. The work of the creators was fulfilled. It was now the task of the creations to claim the world at its dawning. The first were 8, 4 men originating the Quiche families, and the 4 women representing other Maya ethnic groups. Each couple in this chart names at left the male founder of a Quiche royal or noble house, and at right the female partner married in from an outside nation. These first couples would begin the practice of ruling noble houses by right of access to foreign recourse. The noble wives came from other lands, and sovereign authority came by blessings from distant kingdoms. Many of the Mesoamerican cultures on the eve of European contact looked to the Toltecs as an enlightened civilization from the ancient past. Kings often proclaimed their right to rule by displaying signs of an ancestor's journey to the mythical land of Tula, where they received implements of royal prestige and power. The 4 Quiche founders also went to the legendary kingdoms of Tulan in the remote west, and a place called Suiwa to the east, possibly a site in North Yucatan. Like their contemporaries the Aztecs, the Quiche ancestors visited a mythic homeland called 7 Caves. In this fabulous illustration, the 7 caves are painted like wombs, an old and important symbol for Earth as mother. Another name for the citadel was 7 Canyons. The archaeological site La Quemada in Zacatecas, Mexico, is today nicknamed Chicomostoc after the 7 caves. It was during the founders' pilgrimages to Tulan and Suiwa that they received their patron deity Tojil. The deity was related to Maya gods representing divine right to rule. This classic period stele from Yaxchilan, Mexico, shows a king passing his scepter, shaped like the god Kawil, to his heir. Notice how one of the god's legs, in the king's grip, descends to become a serpent's head. The dropping serpent leg could further represent a lightning bolt, another Maya symbol of divine power. This example is from Dos Pilas, Guatemala. Like the classic period Kawil, the new god accompanied the Quiche kings with abilities around fire and energy. As cold, darkness, and misery followed the return of the Quiche founders from Tulan and Suiwa, Tojil gave them fire. In the POPOL VUH, the other kingdoms were also suffering in the bitter darkness before the first dawn, so they approached the Quiche founders to get their fire. Some would try to steal it, others would bargain for it. Tojil therefore told the founders that the other peoples may take the fire, provided that they let Tojil suckle from their chests. And by suckle, the tale means not milk but blood, by the human sacrifices to Tojil from the nations and tribes the Quiche would subjugate. Thus began the expansion of the Quiche Empire across southwest Guatemala. The POPOL VUH will conclude on the king's last exploits up to the time of the writing's completion. Join us for the final installment in the Maya epic, for the sun will rise at last.
Ta she'ul puch chiri chuwi jun juyub chiri shkikuch wikib konogel kiche winak ruk amak. The last third of the POPOL VUH completes the shift from mythical origins to historical narrative as the gods almost entirely withdraw from the tale, the great task of settling in the world, then the onus of the Quiché Maya kings. If the ancient Maya had once spoken in a common tongue, as linguists suggest to have happened 4,000 years ago, by this point in the story the groups had diverged so greatly that they were no longer mutually intelligible, split into truly distinct languages. This was a time to lament the separation of the peoples in speech and space. As the account enters historic time, it lists the Maya ethnic groups surrounding the Quiché, many of which they would attempt to subjugate. It also introduces the Tam and Ilok lineages, allied with the three Quiché noble houses introduced in the last episode. But before the political exploits could continue among the Mayan nations, they paused to literally summit atop the mountain named Xacawitz, named after its cleared, blanched peak. They convened to witness the sun's first rising. The three Quiché founders lit copal incense as ritual offerings to the sun. Once its first rays appeared at last, their heat was so awesomely powerful that it baked the earth, instantly drying the surrounding mud. The original bodies of the Quiché patron gods were petrified, reduced to stone idols. And the sunlight also turned the original forms of dangerous animals to stone, making them less menacing to humanity than they would have remained. Even the sun that now appears in the sky is no longer its actual body, but rather a less harmful reflection, its light cast upon a cosmic mirror. After the sunrise, the Quiché stayed atop Mount Xacawitz to build a citadel. They were still like barbarians, clad in deerskin and foraging for insect larvae and other basic foods. Yet the Quiché were formidable. With stealthy tactics and animal mimicry, they ambushed travelers and soldiers from other nations to steal their precious metals and sacrifice their captive bodies to the patron deities of their noble houses, Tochil, Xacawitz, and Awilish. These three gods in return promised that the Quiché houses would dominate the lands and peoples like wildfire, in their metaphor. When the other nations had had enough of the attacks on their people, they conspired to take the three deities of the Quiché noble houses and pray to their sacred figures. They wanted the power these gods had conferred to the Quiché to expand and conquer on their own terms. To defeat the Quiché and get their gods, the rival nations launched a siege upon their citadel at Xacawitz. The god Tochil heard this and informed his followers of the enemy's plans. The founders devised plans of their own to defend the Xacawitz citadel, which already had the advantage of a sheer, narrow path to its mountaintop location. At last the Quiché used the precious metals they had been stealing from enemy soldiers. With them they adorned mannequins to resemble fully dressed soldiers, decoys mounted around the citadel to deceive the approaching troops and avert their fire. In a cunning ploy of biological warfare, the Quiché army also set up hollowed gourds filled with hornets along the steep mountain path to Xacawitz. Open as the enemies crossed, the gourds released the wasps upon the unsuspecting soldiers, so overwhelmed that many lost their balance and plummeted to their deaths. Humiliated and defeated, the rival nations had no option except to surrender and submit to the Quiché kingdom. As with the hero twins in a previous episode, once the founders had fulfilled their work on Earth, they resigned from it, to let their descendants continue Quiché culture. The four founders gave their family farewells, and they left a memento of their presence in a ritual bundle wrapped in deerskin. They then departed to return to the land where they had been created. The noble houses abandoned the citadel of Xacawitz and settled among the southern Guatemala highlands, often at the cost of heavy war and conflict. However, at the citadel of Comarcaj, the Quiché would regroup to bring together the 22 lineages from the three original houses, and 2 from a new group called the Saqiq Lords. After several generations, an especially powerful figure named Feathered Serpent would emerge from among the nobility. Although the moniker is best known by Quetzalcoatl, after the Mexican creator deity, this lord was Cucumatz in the Quiché Mayan language. Throughout his account, Lord Cucumatz is renowned for the might of his Nahual, his companion spirit, with which he performed powerful acts of supernatural quality. He could transform into a serpent, eagle, jaguar, even a pool of blood. His vision was profound like that of the original creation, such that he could see beyond the horizon and into the future. He had such powers because of not only his practice of priestly austerities, but also his possession of the true POPOL VUH, the source of divine insight, the first and only mention of the book's title in the text. The last chronicles in the POPOL VUH detail the feats of the generations up to the time of the author. They tell of the conquests of tributary nations and further establishments of local kingdoms, as well as the titling of their authorities. These final pages additionally catalog the major priests and temples dedicated to the three Quiche patron gods, Tochil, Chakawitz, and Awilish, and they list the administrative titles among the lineages for each of the four noble houses. An important and abrupt shift takes place with the sudden arrival of the Spanish. The story alludes particularly to Pedro de Alvarado, notorious for his ruthless strategies against the Aztecs in Mexico and the Maya in Guatemala. Then the Spanish magistrates became listed alongside Maya nobility, as the Quiche contended with a new reality after becoming conquered subjects themselves. As the history reaches the author's time, the story comes to a close. It ends on a reminder that the true POPOL VUH, the original version, may be lost, but it exists somewhere in the world. Shere kuri mi shutzinik chi konochel Quiche, Santa Cruz upi. Now that the epic is complete, join us for our final episode. We will conclude the POPOL VUH playlist with today's mask. Today's mask from Guatemala represents a monkey in contemporary Maya style. Carved from wood and bordered with whorls, this simian caricature was worn during a folk dance called the monos and micos. While mono is a general term for monkey in Spanish, Mico translates more specifically to the owl monkey or spider monkey. Bryan Stevens described Mico masks from the Department of Alta Verapaz, Guatemala, with design and make strikingly similar to this examples. For his photos and discussion of the Mico, I linked to MexicanDanceMasks.com in the description box. The mask featured here from the San Antonio Museum of Art also appears to originate from the Alta Verapaz region, toward the center of the country, just northeast of the Quiche territory in which most of the POPOL VUH took place. Monkey masks continue to appear in many traditional dances that give rhythmic, dramatic expression to Maya folklore in Guatemala, and often these simian figures relate to episodes in the POPOL VUH itself. The Museum of Cultural Masks, for example, mentions the presence of Mico masks in two famous performances from southwest Guatemala, the Deer Dance and the Feast of St. Thomas. In the former, the monkey is among a menagerie of masked dancers recalling the balance between humans and wildlife sought in ancient Maya hunting rituals. You may remember from previous episodes the appearances of the jaguar, dog, deer, monkey, and macaw, all features as masked figures in this dance. One of the spectacles during the Feast of St. Thomas is the pole-flying dance of Chichicastenango. A colossal wooden pole is raised in the town square, and monkey dancers climb its ladder in pairs. Harnessed by ropes attached to an overhead frame, the dancers swing down in spinning motion as the frame unwinds the ropes. I have posted a link in the description to the Museum of Cultural Masks website for photos of and details about this event. The movement of the monkey pair, first climbing the pole and then descending, has been likened to the transformation of the monkey twins upon the tree and their attempt to return to the ground. Many of today's Maya in Guatemala keep deep roots with the languages, customs, and folklore of their pre-conquest ancestors. And, like the Quiche king Cucumatz from the last episode, they recognize the POPOL VUH, the book for the council mat, as a lens to see beyond regular time and space and glimpse into the ancient past. Through this playlist, we too have ventured to do the same. Please like, share, and subscribe to the Eye of the Serpent channel for updates. Your Patreon support goes toward travel, research, and production. Thank you for watching, and good roads.